In the 1930s, composer Florence Price became the first African-American woman to have her music played by a major symphony orchestra. But it's only in the 21st century that a catalog of recordings of her works has begun to grow. One new addition is a new release from the Vienna Radio Symphony Orchestra of her Symphony No. 3, Ethiopia's Shadow in America, and the Mississippi River. I'm Colleen Phelps. In this look behind the playlist, conductor John Jetter talks about taking his advocacy for his fellow Arkansan worldwide.
When conductor Eric Leinsdorf wrote the book, The Composer's Advocate, he was really talking about score study and research, but that phrase really would be a great one for right now, as so many of us are acting as advocates for composers who have not gotten their due. And that's certainly the case in not only this new album, but several of the albums where you've conducted. Tell us about your journey in being one of the advocates for Florence Price.
Well, I believe actually very strongly as an American orchestra that we have to advocate what are the history of our states. So that's kind of how it started with our advocacy and recording of the music of William Grant Still. And although he was born in Mississippi, he moved to Arkansas when he was 4. So he's like almost one of our adopted composers. And then from there, the interest in Florence Price came for a number of reasons. One is the largest archive of her manuscripts is at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville in their special collections. And that's 1 hour north of from where I live. So it was very easy to go up there and see all this music, including a lot of orchestral pieces that were in manuscript form that, hadn't been recorded before, or people sort of knew about them, but it just seemed like there was this treasure trove here of music. And of particular interest was this beautiful handwritten score to her 4th symphony, which had never even been performed before. So we thought, well, this is a perfect thing to do. This would have been in 2017. I think we started looking at this and considering it. At that time, there was interest in not only promoting an Arkansan, born and raised here, but at that time, the questions or the discussion of diversity and everything was starting to become an issue. And we knew eventually it would reach the arts. The arts tend to be a little slower sometimes, particularly the performing arts with the most current things. So we thought this would just be a great, really an altruistic project. It was just basically a cool thing to do. And of course, we had a history with Naxos, and as we all know, Naxos Records, when it comes to getting music out there by virtually every composer in the world, they're your go-to label, right? And I'm sure doing what you do, I'm sure you frequently think, oh, I need a recording of so-and-so, or maybe it's maybe a lesser known composer. I need a recording. Oh, there's probably a Naxos one. I'll look there, right? It's normal. So it was a great project, and they were very interested in doing it. So we did our first recording with my orchestra, the Fort Smith Symphony. The recording came out in early 2019, and the plans were to do all of her symphonies and orchestral pieces. And things for us changed here in Fort Smith, and we were not able to do it. It was a financial thing, and it worked out that there was this opportunity for this second volume with a terrific orchestra, the Vienna Radio Symphony. And interestingly enough, that time slot that became available to work with them, as I recall, became available because they were going to be doing a tour in China in early 2020. But at that time, there was this thing called the coronavirus that was there, and it wasn't maybe a good time to travel. Things sure do, change. So that's how that started, and and now we have the final results, after a few years.
Mississippi River is part of this recording, and that's a piece that includes a lot of spirituals. And you're talking about, taking American music over to Europe. That's a deeply, deeply American sounding piece for so many reasons. What was it like to take that piece and teach it and experience it with a European orchestra?
Well, the orchestra is very quick. So, they look at this and say, okay, American composer. I took a few minutes at the beginning just to explain who she was, and everyone was like, say no more. We get it. So they understood, and they understood the spirituals, understood the oral landscape, and it was more of a question of maybe short comments or gestures. And again, very quick, like we know. And of course, the orchestra does have a European sound to a certain degree, of course, but they know to change things, and just asking for certain balances and all that can change the sound landscape. And for me, anytime I get a chance, really to work with any orchestra of my own, or as a guest conductor or whatever, although I have an idea of how I like a piece to go, I'm very collaborative in nature. I'm not old school in the sense that I show up and say, okay, it's going to be exactly this way. I do want the interaction of, I want to know what the orchestra has to say about it. And ultimately, I found the most rewarding experiences, the best results have been a real collaborative give and take. And that doesn't mean you necessarily even talk about it. It's just something that happens, as the process happens.
It sounds like this project was put together sort of on that cusp of the pandemic becoming so widespread. But as we start to emerge from a state of uncertainty in this time, do you feel like there's something about the Third Symphony being the right work for right now, especially because it was a result of the Works Progress Administration and the Federal Music Project?
Yeah, that's real interesting. And not being political, we want to stay out of the political realm, or I don't know, maybe not. But with the infrastructure plan and this idea of sort of a new WPA concept, it's I think it's very timely. The the WPA did so much, and they had a program for composers. And with the government's help during the Depression, there were, I think, 6,000 world premieres of works that were basically funded by the government at a time when it was, when it was really needed. So it's interesting, yes, that this comes out of it. And I just think with so much that's happened in the last few years, and sort of this delayed interest in making things more, again, diverse, it's sort of like our Beethoven Ninth for the year or something like that. It's a terrific piece, and as you know, this year a lot of orchestras are programming Price, a lot, and radio stations. Check any radio station, and there's Florence Price, William Grant Still, George Walker, all these terrific composers. You
can actually always find it on WUOL.
Oh, I set you up for that one. It's great. It's great.
The third movement of the symphony, like all of her symphonies, is a juba. And there's also sort of a ragtimey and bluesy sound to it. So that's very particular to Florence Price. How do you approach those movements?
Well, I love the fact that they're so different than, for example, your typical Austro-Germanic scherzo. That's a very serious, dance movement. And this is totally the opposite. I guess the seriousness of it is it does come from, slave dances. Juba, there's a lot of conjecture where it came from, but it's kind of really comes from the hambone, which is an old dance form where people would basically create music with their bodies. They kind of slap their thighs and chest, and that became your percussion section, if you will. And it was a slave dance. It was one of their few opportunities to be happy, and try to celebrate life in some capacity, right? It was through dancing, through this music. So it's funny, there is, I suppose there's that serious undertone there a little bit. But I think that Price does definitely, I wouldn't say elevate it, but presents it in a very almost, almost urban, big city, jazzy sort of way. That's a real contrast. I look at it as a huge contrast with some of the other movements that are very, Southern in feel, And so I look at that as a contrasting thing. And I think it's a chance for orchestras to really play it up. I think it's a chance for them. I think the worst thing would be for an orchestra to treat that like a symphony, a symphonic movement. I think it has a lot more openness to it. Just play it like you're in a jazz club somewhere, So kind of hopefully let our hair down a little bit more. And it's great music. And that sort of feel, what I like about it is in the concert hall and in a traditional classical subscription concert, that sort of feel isn't there very often in those concerts. When you're playing Brahms, that isn't there. When you're playing Beethoven or Mahler, that's not there. This very American, laid back moment. And I think those moments need to be part of our concert hall experience, part of the classics experience. I suppose you could say, well, that's more of like a pops thing. And that's no. The happiness that's in the jubas, should be part of our artistic experience, right? I mean, we always try to be happy, right? That's when we like to laugh and smile, and that's like something we do every day. It's what we strive for. So it should be in the concert hall. And I think that's one of the really cool things about her piece, her music. It brings that aesthetic idea into the concert hall a little bit more. Other composers do it, but generally there's not enough of that, I think, in the concert halls.
Do you see a little parallel with the scherzo, though, that, the juba being this sort of like, our drums were taken away, so we used our bodies, and sometimes, there's from what I've read, it could have been used to pass messages along that were sort of hidden in the happy music, and that it is sort of the American scherzo.
Yeah, it could be. I think those undertones are there, but her, it's interesting. Those are all good points. The music itself is very bright. So I think that, if there's secret messages in there, it's like, don't play it like there's any secret messages in there. That makes it more secret. That makes it even more conniving, I guess. But yeah, it's definitely, you're right. It would definitely be, the version of, it would be an American scherzo, very different emotional content than you'd get in like a Dvorak scherzo. And those are cool pieces too, just totally different.
Speaking of a totally different set of emotions, yours is the second recording that at least I can find of Ethiopia's Shadow in America. Both of these recordings are by European orchestras. Do you think there is a point that piece hits so deliberately and on the nose that American orchestras kind of shy away from the piece?
Well, first of all, I think there's a couple. As far as the recordings go, unless I'm mistaken, I think ours, Yay, is actually the world premiere commercial recording. I don't think there's another. I think I know there's a couple online, not to take anything away, but I think there's a couple that are like on YouTube, right?
Right. There, I found the BBC Orchestra in Wales.
Yeah. And I think that's like a live performance. I don't think that's like a release.
So it's not a released recording. Yeah. So first released recording, but anyway, it seems like Florence Price is making her way onto programs in the United States. This is not the piece they're choosing.
Yeah, that's true. And they should, as far as the message. Well, I can't answer that. I know actually that the pieces that are tending to be chosen are, the larger the symphonies or the real short pieces, like there's a couple of string orchestra pieces. But Ethiopia's Shadow, there's that. There's a piece called The Oak. There's a terrific piece called Songs of the Oak that's totally unknown. There's some two concert overtures. And these kind of pieces that are, a little longer. They're more like tone poems. I haven't seen those as much on programs. I'm wondering, I don't know if people just don't know about Ethiopia's Shadow. I don't know if it fits into, the rest of the, I don't know how it works in the rest of the programming. As far as it being, going back to your question, yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say how, orchestras are handling this. If they're doing all this because they're maybe feeling pressure, or if they're really wanting to program. I know that's what you're getting at, right? And the answer is probably it's all of the above. I mean, obviously, symphony orchestras, and I'm the music director one. We've generally been pretty slow at the tape. We've generally relied on the same 20 or 30 composers. I mean, think about it. For all this time, it's really been this same handful of composers. Like, wow, it's like, we don't necessarily, rely on the same 20 or 30 movie directors when we watch movies. So I think there's a lot of, maybe previously there's a lot of fear in programming on a number of levels. A lot of orchestras don't like to program new music. That's starting to change a little bit. And I think what's happening this year is her music's being programmed. It's kind of the first time that an unknown, or I guess you could say obscure composer is suddenly like on everyone's programming, right? I mean, this really hasn't happened since probably, ironically, probably like Mahler. Before the mid-1960s, people didn't perform Mahler. And then Leonard Bernstein recorded it, and all of a sudden everyone started performing. So this is like really the first time. And I think it's working really well. I think people are going to these concerts and listening to recordings, and broadcasts, saying, wow, I really like that music. That's really great. And I think people are finally saying, oh, we don't have to play those same handful of composers over and over again. And I love the composers, but just me personally, and maybe it's because of the projects that I've been involved in, but on a personal level, even I'm really wanting to just, from a listener standpoint, really start to hear a lot of different music. And I'm in, my orchestra, our season's small, but I look at a lot of the major orchestras, and it's interesting how you can look at a whole season and they do a lot of concerts. And it's amazing how many composers reappear, in that one season. It's like you have all these concerts. Can you just have one Mozart piece and that's it, and one Beethoven piece? Because there's so many other composers, and even composers like a Sibelius or Vaughan Williams, for example, they don't show up on a lot of programs, and people really love their music. So I know we're getting off the track a little bit, but I think this Florence Price situation actually really jumpstarts an idea of you could present a composer that people don't really know, and yeah, the response was really great. And it doesn't really ultimately matter what the reason is. If it's because we just all think the music's great, fine. If there's a cultural agenda right now, it doesn't matter. It's whatever you can do to get the music out there. I think it's all good. That's just my opinion.
Sort of wrapping up, and definitely paralleling with a lot of what you've already said, between audiences, historians, music teachers, and publishers, it feels like performers have a lot of outs when it comes to widening the spotlight, should we say, of composers and pieces that we pick. They have a lot of places to point their finger and say, well, they don't want it. Well, they're not helping. Well, they make it really hard. And for performers and conductors, what are some ways, and you mentioned shopping locally, which I think is a great part of this. What way can performers and conductors directly be part of the solution?
Well, I've been in, because of what I'm doing, I've been involved in, online discussions about, programming, what you're talking about. And, ways, I know, I'll probably get in trouble for this, but I know at some of the recent League of American Orchestra, their national conferences, they'll make diversity and inclusion like a really big part of the thing. And there are all these breakout sessions and meetings about, how to program music. You just put it on the program. And I know that seems almost simplistic or maybe a little edgy, but that's all you have to do. You just put a piece on the program. You just decide it's great music. But I think the single biggest fear is the financial part. I think a way to alleviate this problem is, I think orchestras need to try to do a better job with finances. I think if they weren't so worried about, well, we have to make sure that every piece on this program is going to make everyone happy so they'll come back. I think once we get away from that, you could program, quite a bit of music. So I think the biggest thing is financial. And then you're right. I mean, for decades and decades, we've been in this mindset of masterpieces. A lot of orchestras actually have a masterwork series. That should probably be eliminated, that word, because, we've gotten to the point now where a lot of orchestras won't even play, excuse me, they have to pick the best symphonies by Dvorak or Mahler. They won't even play like Dvorak Symphony No. 5. We've got to do 8 or 9 or maybe 7. And that whole mindset, that's not the way the music was created in the first place. We're supposed to have this really broad spectrum. So I think people just need to quit being afraid and just do it. And we're seeing a lot of orchestras doing it this year, and I think at the end of the day, they're going to say, wow, the Met did the Terence Blanchard opera recently. And I mean, the response was great. The reviews were terrific. And, there's just so much great music out there. And I think also what we can do is emphasize the fact that when you go to a concert, part of it is an exploration. It's kind of a new experience, and it's not always everything that you know, everything that you knew. And I mean, we watch movies all the time, going back to movies where we kind of have an idea of what it's like, but we're not totally sure. Why can't we do that in the concert hall? Why does it have to be all these pieces that everyone's known and heard a million times over? I really think that that fear is relatively unfounded.
You can hear John Jetter conduct music by Florence Price with the Vienna Radio Symphony Orchestra wherever you stream music, and you'll find these recordings on WUOL Classical Louisville.